I've never shared any of this publicly before. Today, I'm going to be talking about the emotional toll that peripheral neuropathy takes on someone's life. And I'll be doing that by peeling back the curtain on my own very personal struggles with it. Now, my neuropathy started with type 1 diabetes, which I was diagnosed with at 40 years old. If you don't have diabetes, it doesn't really matter. The fear, the denial, the frustration, the guilt, the overwhelm, it's all the same, regardless of your personal neuropathy origin story. Emotionally, what I felt is what I've heard echoed by people with every type of neuropathy imaginable. This video is going to be about as raw as it gets because I'm not following a script today either. Because it's impossible to carefully curate words that truly capture what this does to a person. This side of neuropathy doesn't get nearly enough attention. The grief, the loneliness, the confusion, the what ifs, it's really messy. And that's because neuropathy is invisible. It doesn't look like a disability. And in the early stages, when you're just starting to notice that something's off, there's often doubt, dismissal, even gaslighting, which really only leads to deeper hopelessness, isolation, and frustration. A lot of emotions. And while I could sit here and list every one of them that people experience, that would be checking boxes and do a disservice to the complexity of this issue. We've all arrived at this point through wildly different circumstances. Not all of us have diabetes. Some went through chemo. Some have no idea what triggered theirs. Some were injured, some were prescribed medications that brought it on. Some are teenagers and some are in their 80s. It literally spans every age group. It doesn't skip one. But the emotional fallout, that's the part that's surprisingly universal. There's no one-size-fits-all fix either. Some people see major improvement with dietary changes or certain supplements, others don't. And while this information is really important, especially when you're in the process of gathering it, this particular video isn't about chasing remedies, not today. It's about facing the emotional reality of living with neuropathy. And to do that, I'm going to share my own. So I've talked to thousands of neuropathy sufferers over the years, while secretly dealing with it myself. And over time, I started seeing patterns in the pain. The same themes kept showing up in people's voices: fear, anger, guilt, grief, and that unrelenting search for someone, really anyone, who got it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Now, this video isn't going to be about diabetes, but for me, it was the first domino to fall. They are intimately intertwined. Neuropathy came much later though, but the fear and denial, it started the day that I got this diagnosis. I will never forget sitting in my car, completely stunned after hearing the words, "You have type 1 diabetes." And yes, I was in my car, and if you want to hear that whole story in its entirety, then let me know in the comments. But yeah, I was 40 and a nurse, and I had spent years helping people manage their neuropathy and other health issues. And now, I knew I was going to become one of those people. I could already see the future playing out, and I wanted no part of it. I didn't want to be a patient. I wanted to keep that world out there, something that I would deal with if and when it ever crossed into my own reality. But suddenly all of that out there stuff was a hell of a lot closer, and I wasn't ready. Even though I'd gone to nursing school, learned everything about endocrinology, a subject, by the way, that I hated with the fire of 1,000 suns. But anyway, and I had helped countless patients navigate their own chronic conditions, but I still couldn't accept it for myself. And to make things worse, I wasn't just diabetic. I'm what they call a brittle diabetic, meaning even if I do everything right, carb count, fast, avoid sweets, my blood sugar still spikes and crashes like someone gave it a Red Bull and a taser and said, "Figure it out." I can fully function with a blood sugar of 50 and you would never have any idea. I can drive a car, hold a conversation, see patients, and be in the danger zone without feeling anything, really. It's a weird, unsettling place to live, constantly wondering if my body's going to be hanging like a be back in 20 sign. Now, one of the hardest things about this entire experience was the realization that the version of me I had been up to that point was now gone. The person who could go 1,000,000 miles an hour and still have gas in the tank. Now, literally everything required calculation. But once I had the diagnosis, I barely told anyone. No coworkers, not close friend, nobody. I kept it very small and private. I just didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to address the common statements that would follow. But you're not overweight. You've always been so healthy. How did you, of all people, wind up with type 1? Because I was still working through all of that myself. I didn't want to be diabetic. I didn't want to carry that label. And so I became really good at pretending I was fine for years. I even kept it from people I was seriously dating after my divorce. And a perfect demonstration of my closeted diagnosis Olympics here. There was a night that my boyfriend and I were in New York for dinner. And as we're walking back to the car afterwards, I got that first nod of like, hey girl, you know, we're at 50 and steadily plummeting. So I knew I had probably like 10 minutes max before I was sitting on the curb like a drunk white girl after last call. Like it was a very short span of time. But you know, all I could manage, I was so weak, all I could manage was I need sugar. And you know, he stopped and kind of side-eyed me like, okay, we just came from dinner, but yeah, okay. And you know, 20 minutes later, we're in the car and I'm double fisting Swedish fish into my mouth, and that obvious question is lobbed in my direction. Like, anything you want to tell me, Danielle?
Well, I have diabetes.
And it was, yeah, you know, I just kind of blurted that out. And the look on his face is one that you would expect, kind of like, okay, I thought this was going to be something much worse. But okay, like it was just weird. It was weird. But here's why I'm telling you this at all. After we talked about it, you know, I expected the normal platitudes and responses one gives. This is no big deal. I'm glad I know now. I understand, whatever. Even maybe a little anger. But what I actually got was, well, yeah, I'm kind of glad you didn't tell me early on. And in that moment, it just solidified every delusional fear I had about this. And it hit me. I wasn't privately managing this condition. I was hiding it. I had built a whole facade to protect myself from being seen as sick, basically. My diabetes was really like Harry Potter under the stairs. Unwanted, inconvenient, and only let out when absolutely necessary. So what happens when you keep that much of yourself hidden for that long? Or maybe you're not hiding your neuropathy at all. In fact, you might be quite vocal about it, but at some point you grow to believe that unless someone has it, they'll never truly understand how it can take over an entire life. So you might stop talking about it. You anticipate the eye rolls from friends and family, maybe even your providers. Or the other side of this is maybe you just simply don't want to worry your loved ones and tell yourself, everyone has stuff they're dealing with and I'm not going to add to theirs. Right? That's what I did. You start to silently advocate for yourself, but this can be extremely isolating. Not just in the obvious way either, but existentially lonely. The kind where you can be surrounded by people but still feel like you're on an island. And when you live with any chronic illness really, but especially one that's invisible, people stop checking in because they don't know how to support you or what to say, or they assume that you're fine. And to be honest, you've trained them to think that. You downplay the symptoms, you smile through the appointments, you act like it's manageable, but inside you're freaking exhausted. You're scared and you really don't know where to turn for support anymore because you're anticipating you're not going to get clear answers anyway, right? And then come the what ifs. What if this gets worse? What if I can't work? What if while I'm spending all of this time and money, my neuropathy is progressing to the point of permanent damage? When I started working in specialty pharmacy with IVIG, I was suddenly talking to neuropathy patients left and right on a daily basis. People who were deep into the weeds of it, some with more sensory-based presentations like burning, numbness, hot and cold irregularities, others that had motor issues like walking or strength issues, and some with a combination. And still at that point, I hadn't had any neuropathy symptoms myself, not yet. Then one day I was in the shower and noticed a patch from my ankle to my thigh that just felt off. Not numb exactly, but strange. Like the signals were fuzzy, and I knew. I didn't need a neurologist to confirm it. I had crossed the line. My first official complication of diabetes had arrived. And just like that, the fear absolutely exploded. I went from, maybe I can manage this, to, oh God, it's happening and I can't ignore it this time. And if you're watching this right now and nodding because you've had that moment too, then I want to say something very clearly. You are not being dramatic. You're not weak for being scared. This is what happens when your body starts doing things that you can't explain, you can't predict, and you can't always stop. The fear is real and it's loud, but you can soften it and interrupt the spiral, not always permanently, but moment by moment. And it starts with something like taking a breath. And I know you're probably like, really, Danielle? Yes, absolutely. You need to pause and you need to take a breath. Just humor me. You're not alone, even if nobody around you gets it. If that fear is screaming in your head, you can scream back at it. I'm here and I'm figuring it out one step at a time. So you're not dying, you're overthinking with a hijacked nervous system. And when I begin to zoom in a little too much, I stop whatever I'm doing and think, yes, I'm feeling these symptoms, but the panic is temporary and I don't need to solve everything right now. I just need to stay present. But I'll be honest, that took me a while. Okay, I wasn't the Zen master when this started happening. I was freaking out every 5 seconds, honestly. Every conversation I'd be having with a patient, I was like, in my head, everything they were saying, yep, that's gonna be me. Yep, that's coming down the pike. Like, I was not good at it at first, and you won't be either, especially if you have a sensory type neuropathy that's just constantly burning and you feel like you're just walking around on fire. Very difficult to deep breathe and center. I get it. But although this moment is hard, you're not powerless in it. And consider this, your body may not feel like home right now, but it's still listening to you. It's okay to ask for help. It's completely okay to not have those answers yet. You don't have to warrior your way through every single second. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit, I'm scared and I'm overwhelmed, and that's got to be okay. Initially, it might be really uncomfortable, but at some point, you will get better at pulling yourself back from the ledge. And while all that's fine and good, I was pissed. Not just scared, I was angry. I was angry that this was happening at all, angry that I didn't do more, angry at myself for not managing my diabetes better to stave this off, angry that I knew what I needed to do and still didn't do it fast enough, and then angry at a healthcare system that makes obtaining even the most basic support feel like a game you have no idea how to play. Especially when it comes to neuropathy. It's one of the most common nerve conditions out there. And somehow, still, half the time, you're the one educating your provider or an insurance rep about it. It is infuriating. And when you're the one dealing with it in your body, the anger becomes like a wildfire that just touches everything. You get angry at your legs for not cooperating, at your feet for burning, your hands for going numb when you're trying to type or just make dinner. Then right behind the anger comes the guilt. It's quieter, but it seeps in and it hangs around. You start wondering, did I cause this? Should I have seen this coming? Did I wait too long? Am I not exhausting all avenues of treatment? And if you're a parent, you might feel guilty that you don't have the energy to be fully present. If you're a spouse or partner, you feel guilty that your symptoms are impacting somebody else. If you're still working, you might feel like you're not able to pull your weight. And if you're unable to work, well, the guilt can eat you alive. And if you're like me, a nurse or someone who's always been the caregiver, that guilt cuts even deeper because suddenly you're not the one holding it all together anymore, right? It's very different living on the other side of what you're used to. You're not the calm, rational, I've got this voice anymore. You're the one spiraling that's pretending everything's fine. So that's also where imposter syndrome comes in. And nobody really talks about this too much in healthcare either, or in caregiving of any kind, really. You can show up for others steady and strong while your own house is literally burning down to the ground around you. You can advocate like a warrior for someone else's prior auth or, pain management, and then go home and collapse because you feel completely powerless over your own condition. So, that was me. And to those watching this who aren't nurses or doctors, but who feel that same pressure to keep it together, you know what I'm talking about, right? You're the one people rely on. You don't want to scare your kids. You don't want to burden your partner. You don't want to have to explain again why you're canceling plans. So you muscle through it, you smile, you minimize, you crack jokes about maybe you're moving slower than everyone else your age, but underneath, you just feel like you need to grin and bear it. And that sets a dangerous precedent because you can only stay in that situation for just so long. So here's what I want to say to all of that. You're allowed to feel angry. You're allowed to feel guilty. You are allowed to hate what's happening and still be a good person, a good parent, a good partner, a good advocate. These emotions don't make you weak. They make you real. And they're part of the grieving process that chronic illness forces on us. Grieving the version of life that you thought you'd have, grieving the body that used to cooperate, and grieving that certainty that you used to move through the world with. So you don't need to rise above every emotion. That's kind of baloney. You're human. And if today all you can do is acknowledge the anger and sit with it without letting it wreck you, then that's enough. Let it move through, let it pass on by, and then when you're ready, you keep going. Now, it wasn't until 2022 that something finally shifted for me. I was researching neuropathy pretty much 24/7 for both my patients and myself, but everything I came across on YouTube felt just either too clinical, fell flat, or a little outdated, whatever. And then certainly nothing spoke to the emotional side of this condition or the day-to-day reality of managing it. And then one night, I just had this moment of extreme clarity. I was already having these conversations with patients every day, so why not start recording them? Why not put it out there for people who are searching for answers the same way I had been? That's how Lucid Med came to be. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't have any content strategy or even clear direction. I didn't even know how to edit, I didn't even know how to use a camera. Okay, I'll admit that. I mean, I knew how to use I even had to teach myself how to use my iPhone camera.
Who am I kidding?
Yeah, it was a hot mess. It was a mess. It was dark times. But, I kind of felt that if I was feeling overwhelmed and confused and isolated by this experience, then other people probably did too. And maybe, just maybe, if I shared what I was learning and how I was navigating it, someone else out there maybe wouldn't feel so alone. And yes, by now I had been treating my neuropathy consistently for a couple of years at this point. I started doing what I'd been telling everyone else to do. I added R-alpha lipoic acid, I started using red light therapy, started stretching more and consistently, doing desensitization exercises. I would keep a little thing of beans underneath my desk and sink my feet into it a few times a day. And no, it wasn't magic. I didn't wake up cured, but something changed. I started to rebuild trust with my body. And maybe more importantly, I started to rebuild that trust with myself. Even still, I didn't share my diagnosis. Not right away. I kept that wall up because I had spent so many years performing competence and being the nurse, the fixer, the professional. That vulnerability felt like a bridge too far for me still. It was a risk I wasn't ready to take. But eventually something flipped again. I realized that being honest about my experience didn't take away from my credibility in any way. It, if anything, it added to it. And this might seem completely obvious to anyone watching right now, but at the time, I wasn't seeing that, and I finally dipped my toe into my own battle with diabetes and neuropathy on February 1st, 2023, when I uploaded this video. And then once I opened that door, there was really no going back. I know it sounds cliche, I know, but I got to a point where I was educating on neuropathy. That was my focus, but I was also feeling really guilty that I had found remedies that were working for me, but I wasn't sharing them with the people watching my channel because I still didn't want to admit that I had it. And if you're in that place right now, the in-between, that limbo where you're still figuring out how to manage this, you're not behind. You're not doing it wrong. You don't need to go from despair to hope overnight. Coping isn't a straight line by any means. Sometimes it's just drinking a little more water or doing the stretches you've been avoiding or deciding to stop, doom scrolling long enough to take a damn breath. And the reclaiming part of it, that's not about getting your old life back. It's about learning how to live in the body that you're in today with as much grace and honesty as you can manage. Don't wait to feel ready. That is a complete myth. Often healing begins in the middle of the absolute mess that you find yourself in. It did for me. So you're allowed to start as many times as you need to, again and again. And you're allowed to build a life that works for your nervous system, not in spite of it. And if no one has told you lately, you're doing better than you think. So keep going. Chronic pain doesn't just wear you down emotionally. It rewires your brain. It messes with everything. It messes with your memory, your mood, your ability to feel pleasure. Your nervous system goes into overdrive and it starts anticipating pain before it even happens. But the good news is the same brain that got rewired by pain can also rewire itself to heal. That's neuroplasticity. And if you're out there and this all sounds way too familiar, then just know you are not crazy. You're not lazy. You're not overreacting. You're surviving something that most people never truly understand. This space is for you. Share your story in the comments. Tell me what helps or what hasn't, because the emotional labor of neuropathy is very real and we shouldn't have to carry it alone. I'll help you carry it. You help me carry it. We'll help each other. The next thing that I'm really, really excited to try to treat my neuropathy is neuropuncture. And you're probably saying, what is that? but I had the most fascinating conversation with Dr. Michael Cordino the other day. And if you want to hear more about it, click this video. It is absolutely fascinating. And what I also recommend is that you stay healthy and lucid.